If you are considering a doctoral education in social work, then this video should help give an overview of the differences in focus, requirements, career paths, and just pros and cons for the PhD versus the DSW, which are the two main types of doctoral degrees in social work education. Now I'm going to start with a little disclaimer here, which is first that this was recorded in March of 2022, and it's always a good idea to do your own research into different aspects of programs that you're considering because they vary widely, and just checking the CSWE website and other sources to see if there's been any updates since I recorded this. I also want to give the caveat that I don't have either degree currently, although I am pursuing my DSW. And so as a DSW student, of course, I'm a little biased. I'm going to try to be as neutral as I can in this video because there's really not one that's better than the other. It's just a matter of what's a better fit for you, your interest and skills and goals. So let's talk first about the focus area. So if you think of other fields outside of social work, like psychology, education, there's a lot of other types of doctorates besides a PhD, right? So you have MD, medical doctors, JD, Juris Doctor. You have PsyDs versus PhDs in psychology. You might have EdDs in education. And so the same is true for kind of the difference between a DSW and a PhD. So DSW stands for Doctor of Social Work. It is a practice doctorate, which advances your career in professional practice, like clinical mental health work, leadership and management, or perhaps teaching at some institutions, and I'll talk more about that. And there's, certainly some curriculum and knowledge of research, but it's really focusing on those practical social work field skills. Whereas the PhD, so it's like a philosophy doctorate in social work, is really a research doctorate, and their curriculum is going to be focused on research methodologies so that you can advance new knowledge to the field and have a career as a researcher or possibly in academia as well. So let's talk a little bit about the history, and then I'm going to talk about where we are today in terms of what these programs look like, some requirements and formats for each, common career paths, accreditation, and then my personal thoughts on the pros and cons of each. So starting with the history. Originally, many doctoral degrees that were awarded in social work years ago were titled DSW, but then there was a shift towards the PhD, and PhD became the most, common doctorate in the 80s and 90s, and really up and through today. So originally a DSW was more of a research-focused curriculum, but then it kind of switched over to the PhD being the main and virtually only doctoral degree in social work that was common, but it's really reemerged in popularity. So in 2007, it started making its comeback, and there have been some rapid growth in recent years, basically in response to the need for practitioners who can perform, quote, practice-based research and research-based practice. Also for senior clinicians who can take on leadership positions in public and nonprofit agencies, where that doctoral degree is more of an expectation now. So the PhD has been the most common and still is barely, but the DSW is really growing. So there's been a large increase in enrollment in these practice doctorate programs. And I have one more note here. Yes, so basically in looking at the history, it kind of started DSW, switched to PhD, and now it's starting to have them both be available for different reasons. So where are we right now? With the DSW, this is current as of 2019, which is when the most recent CSWE report came out. That's the Council for Social Work Education. There were 1,500 students in about 25 DSW programs, which is a 260% growth between 2014 and 2019. There are 27 programs planning to launch a DSW and 56 considering it. So we're going gangbusters. It's really growing phenomenally in the last few years. Whereas in the PhD program, there's still a few more. There's about 1,800 students, but much more programs and more established programs. There's over 80 programs that offer a PhD. And they've seen about a 6% growth during that same time period. So still absolutely growing and relevant and necessary for certain career fields, but with DSW rapidly catching up and gaining in popularity. So what happens in each of these programs? Well, with both of them, you typically need your MSW degree and as much practice experience as you can get. This is more valued in a DSW program where it tends to be working professionals and highly skilled practitioners who've been in the field and want to elevate their practice to the next level. But generally with both, many programs require a minimum of at least 2 to 3 years of practice experience. In the PhD, they're also, well, for both of them, but particularly the PhD, they're really going to value any research experience that you've had in the field, or maybe by conducting, say, an honors thesis in your undergraduate or an MSW thesis. That can be really helpful to show that you have experience and skill in some of those research-based skills. The length and requirement of program, of course, varies between schools, but on average, you're looking at maybe about 3 years to complete a DSW, whereas a PhD can be 4 to 6 years on average. The DSW is often designed with working professionals in mind, so there's more flexibility with many programs offering part-time options, hybrid programs, some are fully online options, and so there's just more ability, I think, to balance work and school in the DSW. Again, this is just a generalization and there can be differences between programs. But for PhDs, you're more likely to see students going full-time and in person. And for kind of the final piece of work that you present at the end of the programs. A PhD is going to be a dissertation, which is a very time-intensive work towards contributing knowledge in the field. Some DSWs require a dissertation, but others might have a capstone project, which is more of a, again, kind of practical. Instead of being research focused, there may be research requirements, but it might be starting a program or some other type of more practice-oriented artifact that you can produce, or a certain number of publications. So what that looks like, about whether there's a dissertation or if it's more of a capstone or banded dissertation, banded capstone, that can really depend on the programs. I'll talk a little bit about tuition when I discuss the pros and cons, but again, that varies very widely. With the PhD, you're going to be more likely to potentially find a program that will pay you to go, whereas with the DSW, you're almost certainly going to be paying out of pocket for tuition. So what can you do with these degrees? Again, varies, but some very common ones are that with the DSW, you might advance in clinical practice, whether that be managing other LCSWs or having your own private practice, or rising in some kind of organization in a clinical leadership position. A lot of administration, management, and leadership positions, and sometimes teaching as well. And this is especially true if you're pursuing a non-tenure track, so teaching-focused position, or a role at a teaching-focused university instead of a research-focused university. Whereas the PhD, the most common is that you become a tenure track professor. So you become a professor that typically focuses on research while also teaching as well. There's also places in the community, like think tanks or policy places, government, that might hire folks in more of a research capacity. And you might also do some kind of administration or management, particularly in an academic setting. Of course, this is not limited, but generally I would say that the DSW prepares folks for more social work practice, either clinically or through leadership, with also some advanced options for teaching. And the PhD really helps you to be on that research-focused tenure track in an academic setting. I will note too that the curriculum varies quite a bit in DSW programs. So there are some that are a bit more generalist that give you a little bit of all three of these things in the program. There are some that really focus on the clinical piece, others that really focus on the community administrative, policy leadership side, some that are focused specifically on preparing you to be a social work educator. And so depending on what your goals are, that might steer you towards one program over another. Whereas with the PhD, you'll want to be identifying faculty and programs that would best suit your research goals. You would want to have a particular topic in mind of what you want to specialize on, and hopefully have good mentorship of people who would chair your dissertation committee and help cultivate those skills in those areas of expertise. Now, a note about accreditation. This is changing pretty rapidly, and so this is another one where I'm going to say make sure that you do your own research and check if some time has passed since I recorded this video, but there has not been and will not be an accreditation process for PhDs. Typically, the places that offer PhDs are accredited at bachelor's and master's levels, and it's just that the PhD program specifically doesn't have the same accreditation process as the undergraduate and master's programs. That's how it has been for DSWs, but it is changing. So in fall of 2021, CSWE just launched a pilot for the accreditation of professional practice doctoral programs, aka DSWs. So I pulled all of this information from the CSWE website. I'm just going to read a couple notes here that I thought were particularly helpful in explaining what this means and the implications for the DSWs. So right now, within CSWE, there's a few different kind of subcommittees and programs, but this Council on Higher Education Accreditation is only right now set up to accredit bachelor's and master's social work programs. And before we can expand that scope to include doctoral programs, they have to do this pilot. And they say it will be, quote, quite some time before the accreditation of these programs is the norm, that this is going to be a long and incremental process. They also have a note, an FAQ for current doctoral students, and they say that only degrees earned after accreditation of the professional practice doctorate is fully implemented and all existing DSW programs have had a chance to seek accreditation can a non-accredited status carry any significance. So bottom line is there aren't any that are accredited right now. Probably there will be in the future, but it's going to be some time until that happens. So my recommendation, if you're thinking about starting a program soon, would be to ask what their plans are in terms of pursuing accreditation, find out about what that criteria is, and see how confident you are that they would pursue and attain that if that were something in the future. So in summary, again, this is my personal opinion, but I think the pros of a DSW is that it really helps to elevate your knowledge and skills beyond that master's level and just taking that to the next level. It is friendly for working professionals who might not want to give up their careers or pause for several years to pursue full-time work. There may be full-time options, but also part-time or weekend or online options. It can give you an enhanced credibility in practice settings, whether that be through, say, private clinical practice or in participating in interdisciplinary teams or in a leadership position, perhaps allow you opportunities to seek promotion where you are now. And it's growing a lot. So my personal opinion is that the DSW is going to grow a lot and continue to gain more credibility and become more of a standard for hiring and promotion in the future. Right now, the MSW is certainly the most common, highest degree for working professionals and practitioners in the field. But I think gradually it's going to become more common for DSWs to be leaders in the field. Some of the cons are that tuition could be expensive. It really, again, varies on the program that you choose, but whereas the PhD will sometimes pay you to go or offer, different stipends or things like that, the DSW is more likely going to require more significant out-of-pocket expenses or student loans, again, depending on the program. There's also a little bit of stigma in some areas for the DSW. Folks that are kind of pro PhD feel that there's less credibility with the DSW, some misconceptions about it maybe being easier or something like that, but really it's just a different focus. But certainly if your goal is to seek a tenure track research-focused faculty position, the PhD is the better option for you because that's going to prepare you and give you the types of experiences and credentials that are needed to succeed in a role like that. With the PhD, one thing that's really awesome about that is that you really become an expert in your area of research and you're on the cutting edge of that knowledge. As I mentioned, there may be possibilities for full or partial tuition coverage depending on the program you go to. There are more opportunities in academia and there's more established programs since the DSW has been emerging more rapidly in recent years. A lot of programs are newer, and with a PhD you have a lot more established programs and established reputations of those programs. The cons are that there's a larger time investment typically, and there's limited coursework and practice skills. So since the coursework is going to be focused on a lot of research methodology, there aren't going to be as many classes focused on, say, how to teach social work or anything related to clinical or nonprofit management, that kind of thing. So overall, it really just kind of depends on what your goals, interests, and skills are. One is not necessarily better than the other, but there can certainly be one or the other that's better for you, or maybe neither is a good fit for you and you just want to be a bachelor's or master's level social worker, and that's great too. So I wish you the best of luck in your studies. This is my contact information if you want to reach out, and here are some references and recommendations for further reading, particularly on the DSW as it emerges. So best of luck.